This channel breathes through you. Subscribe, like, comment, and tell us, where are you watching from and what time is it for you? Something still lives in the Paris catacombs, and it hates intruders. I never thought I'd be the type to chase shadows in the dark, but life has a way of pulling you into places you never imagined. My name is Alex Harper, and I'm a freelance photographer from Seattle, specializing in urban exploration, abandoned buildings, forgotten tunnels, that sort of thing. It's not just about the photos. It's the thrill of uncovering history that's been buried under layers of dust and decay. I've crawled through derelict asylums in Detroit, scaled rusting silos in the Midwest, and even snuck into old subway lines in New York. But nothing prepared me for what I found beneath Paris. It all started last summer, in 2024. I'd saved up for a solo trip to Europe, partly to escape a messy breakup and partly to fuel my obsession with the macabre. Paris was my first stop, not for the Eiffel Tower or Croesus, but for the catacombs. I'd read about them obsessively online, miles of underground ossuaries holding the bones of 6 million people, relocated from overflowing cemeteries in the 18th century. The official tour is sanitized, a quick loop through neatly stacked skulls and femurs, but I wanted more. The real catacombs stretch far beyond the tourist path, a labyrinth of illegal tunnels honeycombing the city. Urban explorers call it the off-limits section, where the air grows thick with the weight of centuries, and the walls whisper secrets of the dead. I arrived in Paris on a humid July afternoon, the city buzzing with tourists and the faint scent of crepes from street vendors. I checked into a cheap hostel in the Latin Quarter, a creaky old building with peeling wallpaper and a shared bathroom that smelled faintly of mold. My room was tiny, just a bed and a desk, but it overlooked a narrow alley where locals smoked cigarettes and argued in rapid French. I spent my first evening wandering Montparnasse, snapping photos of graffiti-covered walls and the occasional street performer, but my mind was already underground. The next day, I hit the forums, urbex communities on Reddit and Discord where explorers share tips on entrances, maps, and warnings. "Stay away from the deep south," one post read. "Flooding's bad and cops patrol heavy." Another, "Saw something moving in the shadows last time, not a rat." I dismissed it as hype. Every site has its ghost stories to scare off amateurs. I connected with a local explorer named Julian, a wiry guy in his 30s who'd been mapping the catacombs for years. We met at a dimly lit bar near 𝒕𝒉𝒆𝒂𝒓, the official catacombs entrance. He had a tattoo of a skull on his forearm and spoke English with a thick accent. "You're American, eh? First time?" he asked, sipping a beer. "Yeah, but I've done my homework," I replied, showing him my gear. A headlamp, backup flashlight, chalk for marking paths, energy bars, water, and a GoPro for footage. He nodded approvingly but leaned in closer. "Listen, Alex. The catacombs, they're not like your American ruins. People get lost down there every year, and some don't come back." He paused, his eyes flicking to the door as if expecting someone. "There's talk of something living in the depths, not ghosts, something real. Intruders, they say it hates them." I laughed it off. "Come on, man, rats, homeless folks." He shook his head. "No, I've heard screams that aren't human, felt eyes on me in the dark. Just be careful. Mark your path, and if you hear scratching, run." We parted ways, and I felt a mix of excitement and nerves. That night, I pored over a bootleg map I'd downloaded, a scanned copy from the 1980s, annotated with modern notes. The entrance I chose was an old manhole in a quiet park south of the city, away from prying eyes. It was risky. Getting caught meant fines or worse, but the allure was too strong. The descent happened 2 nights later under a moonless sky. I waited until after midnight when the streets emptied. The park was silent, save for the distant hum of traffic. I pried open the manhole with a crowbar I'd bought from a hardware store, the metal groaning like a warning. A rush of cool, damp air hit me, carrying the faint odor of earth and decay. I slipped on my harness, clipped my rope to a nearby bench, and lowered myself down. The ladder was rusted, flakes of iron biting into my palms. About 20 feet down, my boots hit solid ground, a narrow tunnel carved from limestone, walls etched with graffiti from decades of trespassers. "Turn back," one scrawl read in faded red paint. I ignored it, flicking on my headlamp. The beam cut through the blackness, revealing a low ceiling dripping with moisture. I marked an arrow with chalk at the entrance and started forward. The first hour was exhilarating. The tunnels twisted like veins, branching off into side passages filled with bones, skulls staring blankly from piles, ribcage tangled like forgotten puzzles. I snapped photos, the flash illuminating the eerie symmetry of death. The air grew colder, heavier, pressing against my skin. Echoes of my footsteps bounced off the walls, sometimes sounding like they belonged to someone else. Deeper in, the official maps ended, and I relied on instinct and chalk marks. I found a chamber Julian had mentioned, a bone chapel, where femurs formed crosses on the walls. It was beautiful in a grotesque way, a testament to human ingenuity amid horror. But as I lingered, taking close-ups, I heard it, a faint scratching like nails on stone. I froze, heart pounding. Rats, I told myself. Just rats. I pressed on, the tunnels narrowing until I had to crouch. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the drip of water. My watch showed I'd been down for 2 hours when I stumbled into a larger cavern, the ceiling vaulted like a cathedral. In the center, a pool of stagnant water reflected my light like a black mirror. Around it, bones were scattered haphazardly, not stacked neatly like in the tourist areas. Some looked fresh. No, that couldn't be. Bones don't rot, but these had a sheen as if recently disturbed. I set up my tripod for a time-lapse when the scratching returned, louder this time. It came from a side tunnel, rhythmic, deliberate. Scratch, scratch, pause. Scratch, scratch. My breath caught. I called out, "Hello, Julian." No answer. The sound stopped, then resumed, closer. Panic flickered, but curiosity won. I edged toward the tunnel, beam sweeping the darkness. Nothing. Just more bones. But as I turned back, something moved in my peripheral vision, a shadow darting across the pool. I spun, light flashing wildly. Empty. My mind raced, trick of the light, exhaustion. I decided to head back, marking my path carefully. But the tunnels seemed different, turns I didn't remember. My chalk arrows were there, but one was smudged as if brushed by a hand or claw. The scratching followed me now, echoing from behind. I quickened my pace, sweat beading despite the chill. Then a whisper. Not words, but a low hiss, like air escaping a puncture. It slithered through the air, raising hairs on my neck. I ran, boots splashing through puddles, light bouncing. The entrance ladder appeared ahead, salvation. I climbed frantically, emerging into the night air, gasping. Back in my hostel, I reviewed the GoPro footage, mostly bones and shadows. But at one point in the cavern, the camera caught something. A pale shape in the background, humanoid but twisted, eyes reflecting the flash like an animal's. I zoomed in, heart racing. It wasn't human. And it was watching me. That was just the beginning. I couldn't stay away. The catacombs called me back, and what I found next. God, I wish I'd never gone deeper. I couldn't shake it off. That footage haunted me through sleepless nights in the hostel, the pale shape replaying in my mind like a nightmare on loop. By day 3 in Paris, I'd convinced myself it was a glitch, a reflection, maybe even a stray cat that had wandered too deep. But deep down, I knew better. The catacombs had hooked me, their darkness seeping into my thoughts. I had to go back, not just for answers, but because ignoring it felt like leaving a door ajar in my soul, inviting whatever was down there to follow me up. Julian messaged me the next morning, checking in. "You okay?" "No scratches," I lied, saying it was uneventful, but asked if he'd join me for a deeper run. He hesitated, then agreed, but only if we stuck to his rules. No splitting up, hourly check-ins via walkie-talkies, and bail at the first sign of trouble. We geared up that evening, extra batteries. A compass GPS was useless underground, and even a small knife for emergencies, though Julian smirked when he saw it. "That won't help against what's down there," he muttered. We entered through a different spot this time, a storm drain in an industrial suburb, less likely to draw attention. The descent was steeper, a spiral of concrete steps slick with algae, leading into a broader tunnel that Julian called the artery. It connected to the older quarries, predating the ossuaries by centuries. The air was thicker here, laced with a metallic tang that coated my tongue. Our headlamps pierced the gloom, casting long shadows that danced like specters. We talked as we walked, voices echoing softly. Julian shared stories from his years exploring, finding WW2 bunkers hidden in the depths, graffiti from the French Revolution, even a chamber where occultists held rituals in the 70s. "But the South Quadrants," he said, voice dropping, "that's where it changes. The bones aren't just dead there, they feel alive, like they're watching." I showed him the GoPro clip on my phone, zoomed in on the shape. He paled, cursing in French. "Murd, that's it. The intruder hater. Old-timers call it the guardian des os, guardian of the bones. Legend says it's a remnant from the plague times, a soul twisted by death, or maybe something older from the quarry's collapses. It despises the living who disturb the rest." Skepticism warred with the chill in my gut, but I pressed for more. "Has anyone seen it up close?" "Seen. A few. Survived. Not many." He recounted a tale of a group in 2018, 4 explorers who vanished. One resurfaced weeks later, babbling about eyes in the walls and scratches that wouldn't heal. The others, never found. Police blamed cave-ins, but Julian knew better. We reached the Bone Chapel from my first trip, but pushed further south, into unmapped territory. The tunnels constricted, forcing us to crawl on hands and knees through muck that sucked at our clothes. Bones crunched under us, fragments embedding in my palms like accusations. The scratching started subtly, a distant echo we both dismissed as wind through cracks. But it grew insistent, sinking with our breaths. In a wider gallery, we paused for water. The walls here were inscribed with ancient quarry marks, Roman numerals and symbols from miners long dead. Julian traced one with his finger. "These date to the 1600s. They dug too deep, awakened something." As he spoke, my light caught movement, a ripple in the dust like breath-disturbing particles. I swung around, but nothing. "Let's keep moving," I whispered, unease knotting my stomach. We descended a steep incline, ropes secured to pittons Julian hammered in. At the bottom, a vast chamber opened up, ceilings lost in shadow. Bones piled in chaotic heaps, skulls grinning from alcoves like sentinels. In the center, an altar of sorts, a flat stone slab stained dark, surrounded by candles melted to stubs. Recent wax. Impossible. No one came this deep. Julian's face hardened. "This isn't on my maps. We should." The scratching exploded, surrounding us. Not one source, but many, like claws scraping from all directions. Our lights whipped around, revealing nothing but bones. Then a hiss, low, guttural, vibrating through the stone. It wasn't animal, it carried malice, a warning in an unknown tongue. "Run!" Julian yelled, grabbing my arm. We bolted back up the incline, ropes burning our hands as we hauled ourselves. The sounds pursued, scratching turning to thuds like something heavy dragging behind. I glanced back once. Eyes gleamed in the dark, multiple pairs, reflecting red in my beam. Not human. Elongated pupils, slitted like a cat's but wrong, too intelligent. We made it to the crawl space, scrambling through. Something grabbed my boot, a cold, bony grip that yanked hard. I kicked wildly, feeling flesh give way under my heel. A screech pierced the air, inhuman and furious. Julian pulled me free, and we didn't stop until we hit the artery, breaths ragged. Back on the surface, dawn breaking over the suburbs, we collapsed against a wall. My boot was torn, deep gashes like claw marks. Julian examined them, shaking. "It let us go. Why?" I didn't know, but the wounds burned unnaturally, a fever spreading up my leg. That night in the hostel, I dreamed of the catacombs, endless tunnels where bones reassembled into forms that hunted me. I woke sweating, the scratches on my boot mirrored faintly on my skin as if etched from inside. Julian vanished the next day. His phone went to voicemail, apartment empty. Police shrugged, people disappear in Paris. But I found a note slipped under my door. "It followed you up. Leave now." Scrawled in chalk like our marks underground, I should have listened. But the pull was stronger. The catacombs weren't done with me, and whatever lived there, it was just getting started. The note from Julian, or whoever left it, sent ice through my veins. I crumpled it and tossed it in the trash, but its words echoed. "It followed you up." I paced my cramped hostel room, the city sounds outside mocking my fear. Paris in daylight was vibrant, alive with laughter from cafes and the chime of bicycles. But I felt marked, like prey that's caught the predator's scent. My leg throbbed where the scratches had appeared, faint red lines that itched unnaturally, spreading like veins under my skin. I popped some ibuprofen, but it did nothing for the growing dread. I tried to distract myself, visited the Louvre, snapped photos of the Mona Lisa's enigmatic smile, but even there in the crowds, I swore I heard scratching, faint as fingernails on glass. By evening, I was back online, scouring forums for similar stories. One thread caught my eye. A user named _crawler87 posted about the entity in 2022. "It's not a ghost," they wrote. "It's flesh and bone reassembled from the dead. Hates light, hates noise, hates us for invading its domain." Comments piled on, skeptics calling it BS, but a few corroborated with blurry photos of twisted figures in the shadows. One reply, "I lost my brother to it, don't go back." But I had to. Julian's disappearance gnawed at me. If he was down there, trapped or worse, I couldn't just leave. Plus, the journalist in me, the part that chased stories for clicks and adrenaline, saw potential. A viral video of The Guardian could make my career. Stupid, I know, but fear mixes strangely with ambition. I geared up heavier this time. A brighter LED lantern, flares, a first aid kit, and even a can of bear spray I'd smuggled from the States. No knife. After last time, I knew blades were useless. I entered alone at dusk. Through the original manhole in the park, the metal lid heavier than I remembered, as if the earth resisted. The descent felt like sinking into a grave, the air cooler, more oppressive, clinging to my clothes like wet hands. I followed my old chalk marks south, deeper than before, past the bone chapel into territories Julian had warned against. The tunnels here were older, quarried limestone, rough and unstable, with occasional collapses blocking paths. I squeezed through a narrow fissure, emerging into a gallery I hadn't seen, a vast space where bones formed murals, skulls arranged in screaming faces, femurs spelling out Latin phrases. "Memento mori," one read. "Remember you must die." Charming. The scratching began almost immediately, a welcoming committee. It was playful at first, darting from side to side like it was hurting me. I ignored it, pushing on, my lantern casting a wide beam that revealed graffiti from the 19th century. Names of quarry workers, dates, pleas for help during cave-ins. One inscription chilled me. 𝒕𝒉𝒆𝒂𝒓, the beast lives here. Dated 1789, the Revolution year. Hours in, I'd lost track of time, my watch fogged from humidity. I found a chamber that reeked of something foul, not just decay but rot, fresh and organic. Bones were scattered, but among them, remnants of modernity. A shredded backpack, a broken flashlight, scraps of clothing. Julian's? My heart hammered. I rifled through, finding a wallet, his ID inside smeared with what looked like blood. dried, flaky. Nearby, drag marks in the dust, leading to a dark alcove. That's when the hiss returned closer, laced with a wet gurgle like lungs filling with fluid. I backed away, flare in hand, but curiosity, damn it, pulled me forward. In the alcove, a nest of sorts, bones woven into a cocoon, pulsing faintly as if breathing. No, not pulsing. Something inside moved, shifting with a slither. I raised my GoPro, filming when claws erupted from the mass, pale and elongated, tipped with yellowed nails. I flung the flare, igniting the space in crimson light. The thing screeched, recoiling, a glimpse of it. Skin like parchment stretched over mismatched bones, eyes milky white but piercing, mouth a jagged maw of splintered teeth. It wasn't one creature. Parts seemed fused from multiple skeletons, animated by some unholy force. A leg from one body, an arm from another, torso bloated and veined. I ran, the flare's smoke choking the air, the creature's pursuit thunderous, thuds and scratches merging into a cacophony. Tunnels blurred, my chalk marks a lifeline I followed blindly. But it was smart. It circled ahead, blocking paths with collapses it triggered, stones rumbling like laughter. I diverted into a side passage, narrow and flooded ankle-deep with icy water that numbed my feet. Hiding in a crevice, light off, I held my breath. It passed by, sniffing, audible inhales, wet and ragged. Close enough I felt its warmth, unnatural in the cold. It paused, claws scraping inches from my face, then moved on, hissing frustration. When silence returned, I crept out, but the damage was done. My scratches burned fiercer, vision blurring with fever. I made it to the surface as dawn broke, collapsing in the park, a jogger finding me delirious. Hospital next, doctors puzzled over the infection, prescribing antibiotics that barely helped. Looks like necrotic tissue, one said. From what? Discharged after a day, I holed up in the hostel, reviewing footage. The nest, the creature, clear as day, but uploading it. No, not yet. The forums would explode, but so would the authorities. And deep down, I knew it wasn't over. The scratches on my leg had deepened, forming patterns like the quarry marks, symbols, ancient and accusing. That night, a knock at my door. No one there, but another note. You took something. It wants it back. What? I hadn't stolen anything. Then I remembered the wallet. Julian's wallet still in my pack. Inside, not just ID, but a folded map, annotated with a path to the heart. The catacombs weren't just a labyrinth, they had a center, and whatever guarded it hated intruders like me. But now it had followed me up, scratching at the edges of my reality. I heard it in the walls, in the alleys outside. Paris wasn't safe anymore. I had to go back, to return what I'd taken, to end this, or become part of it. The wallet burned a hole in my pocket, literally. My skin around where it touched felt hot, inflamed as if the map inside was alive, pulsing with the catacombs' rhythm. I spent the next day in a haze, Paris blurring into a nightmare overlay. Tourists snapped selfies at Notre Dame while I saw shadows in the gargoyle's eyes, heard scratching in the Seine's ripple. The fever from my scratches peaked, visions flickering, bones knitting into forms, Julian's face contorted in a silent scream. I dosed myself with more meds, but they only dulled the edges. By evening, resolve hardened. Returning the wallet, dropping it in some deep chamber, might appease it or draw it out. Either way, inaction was suicide. The notes, the sounds in the walls, they were escalating. I scoured the map Julian had hidden. Crude lines branching from known tunnels into the heart, marked with warnings in French, danger de mort, death hazard, and a symbol matching the ones etching into my leg, a spiral with claws at the ends like a twisted sun. I messaged a few Urbex contacts for backup, but no replies. Alone again. I upgraded my kit. A high-lumen floodlight, extra flares, a GPS beacon useless underground but for surface signaling, and salt old superstition, but forums swore by it for entities. Ridiculous, but desperation breeds belief. Entry at midnight, same manhole, the park empty under sodium lights. Descending, the air hit like a slap, thicker, almost chewable with a new scent. Ozone like before a storm, but underground, unnatural. My chalk marks from before were gone, raced, smeared into dust. It knew I'd return. I followed the map, venturing southwest into virgin territory. Tunnels sloped downward, gravity pulling me like a lure. Bones increased, not stacked but strewn as if a giant child had played and discarded them. Skulls with fractures, femurs gnawed at ends, teeth marks. I shuddered, imagining the creature feasting. The scratching welcomed me, a constant companion now, sometimes ahead, guiding, mocking. I ignored it, focusing on the map's path, a series of turns leading to 𝒂𝒄𝒄. Hours passed, 3, 4, time dilating in the dark. My light caught anomalies, fresh footprints in the mud, not mine, elongated with claw indents, and webs, not spider but sinewy strands like dried veins stretching across passages. In a low-ceilinged room, I found evidence of others. A campsite abandoned, tents shredded, sleeping bags bloodied, personal effects scattered. A phone with a cracked screen, its last photo a blurry shot of eyes in the dark. I pocketed it, evidence maybe, but the battery was dead. Nearby, a journal, pages torn but legible. It collects us pieces to build itself stronger. The last entry, heard Julian screaming. It's using his voice now. My blood ran cold. Julian alive, or mimicked. The hissing started then, but twisted words, garbled French, intruse, haine. Intruder, hate. It echoed from multiple tunnels surrounding. I bolted, map clutched into a descending shaft. Ropes down a 30-foot drop, landing in water knee-deep, stagnant and foul. The flood zone Julian warned about, old quarries intersecting aquifers. My boots sloshed, echoing like applause. The water rippled unnaturally as if something swam beneath. Deeper, the heart approached. A massive cavern, the map's end. But before it, a barrier, a wall of bones interwoven tightly like a dam. Gaps oozed a viscous fluid, glowing faintly bioluminescent. I hacked at it with my crowbar, bones cracking like gunfire. Through a hole, I glimpsed the beyond. A pulsating mass larger than the nest, writhing with forms, half-assembled bodies, limbs twitching. It attacked then. Not one, but multiples, smaller guardians. They swarmed from the water, pale shapes leaping with splashes. I swung the crowbar, connecting with one. It burst like overripe fruit, bones scattering but reformed slowly, hissing. Flares lit the scene, revealing horrors. Creatures pieced from catacomb remains, eyes from skulls, flesh from victims. One had Julian's tattoo on its arm, inked skin stretched over bone. I sprayed bare mace, the chemical hiss matching theirs, driving them back. Through the breach, I tumbled into the heart. A colossal chamber, ceilings arched like a basilica, walls alive with carvings, spirals everywhere, ancient Pictish. No, older. In the center, a throne of skulls, and atop it, the entity. Larger, more coherent. A humanoid colossus, body a mosaic of bones and sinew, face a mask of fused skulls, eyes burning with stolen life. It rose, towering, voice a chorus of the dead. You bring back. Not words, but impressions burrowing into my mind. I threw the wallet at its feet, map fluttering out. It snatched it, crushing, but laughed, a grinding of bones. Not enough, you intruder. The smaller ones closed in, claws extended. I fought, floodlight blinding, but they adapted, shadows coiling. One latched onto my arm, teeth sinking, pain like fire, visions flooding, memories not mine. Plague victims dumped, miners crushed, revolutionaries hiding, all absorbed, their essences fueling this guardian. Born from the city's discarded dead, it protected the catacombs from the living's greed. I broke free, slashing with the crowbar, shattering a limb. It regrew, pulling bones from the walls. Retreat was chaos, back through the barrier, up the shaft, water rising. No, flooding deliberate, the entity controlling the depths. I surfaced gasping, dawn's light a miracle, but the scratches, now on both arms, deepened, symbols glowing. The entity hadn't followed fully, but pieces did. In my wounds, something moved, tiny bones knitting under skin. Back at the hostel, I bandaged, but the infection spread. Dreams intensified, the heart calling, pulling me back. I booked a flight home, but at the airport, a mirror showed my eyes slitted, reflective. It wasn't done. It had claimed a piece of me. Paris faded behind the plane, but the scratching, in my head now, eternal. And the heart, it waits for my return. No, not return. It's already here, in me. The flight home was a blur of turbulence and fever dreams, the cabin lights flickering like eyes in the dark. I landed in Seattle on a rainy August morning. Wait, no, it was September by then. 2024 slipping away like sand. The Pacific Northwest's gray skies felt comforting at first, a far cry from Paris's gilded facades, but the scratching followed me across the ocean. Not audible to others, but in my bones, a constant itch that no amount of scratching could relieve. My apartment, a cluttered one-bedroom in Capitol Hill overlooking the Sound, became my prison. I barricaded the door, drew the blinds, but the symbols on my skin glowed faintly in the mirror, spreading like roots up my arms, across my chest. Doctors here were no help. I visited urgent care, blaming it on a travel bug. They ran tests, blood work, scans, puzzled over the necrosis that wasn't quite necrosis, the bone fragments they found embedded under my epidermis. Like splinters, the dermatologist said, peering through magnified lenses. But these look human. Old. Where'd you say you were? I lied, muttering about a hiking accident in France. Prescriptions for antifungals and painkillers piled up, but the visions intensified. Flashes of the catacombs, the entity's throne, Julian's face melting into the mass. Nights were the worst. I'd wake to shadows moving in corners, shapes that dissolved when I flicked on the light. Once I found claw marks on the windowsill, inside fresh wood shavings on the floor. My cat, Whiskers, an old tabby I'd adopted years ago, hissed at nothing, fur bristling, then vanished one morning. I searched the building, posted flyers, but deep down I knew it had taken her, a piece for its collection. Work suffered. As a freelancer, I had deadlines, photo edits from a Detroit shoot, pitches for new explorations. But my hands shook on the keyboard, the GoPro footage from Paris taunting me from my hard drive. I watched it obsessively, pausing on the entity's form, zooming until pixels blurred into monstrosity. Forums exploded with my anonymous posts. Has anyone survived the Guardian? Replies trickled in, warnings, dismissals, one from a user in Berlin. It's not just in Paris. The quarries connect to older things. Ley lines, ancient burial sites. If it's in you, cut it out before it roots. Cut it out, the idea festered. In a delirium I tried, kitchen knife heated over the stove, slicing into the symbols on my arm. Blood welled, but beneath, tiny bones shifted, reforming the cuts instantly. Pain like lightning and a hiss in my ear. Mine. I passed out, waking to my neighbor banging on the door, concerned about screams. Isolation bred paranoia. Friends called, my ex, Sarah, even reached out, voice laced with worry. Alex, you sound off. Come over. I declined, fearing I'd bring it with me, but loneliness won. I met her at a coffee shop downtown, rain pattering on windows like fingers. She looked good, healed from our breakup, while I hid my arms under long sleeves, sipping latte to steady my nerves. You look like hell, she said bluntly, eyes scanning my pallor. What happened in Paris? I spilled fragments, the catacombs, the scratches, omitting the entity to avoid sounding insane. She listened, skeptical but concerned. Sounds like PTSD or an infection. See a specialist. As we talked, the scratching amplified, audible only to me, coming from under the table. I glanced down, nothing, but Sarah winced, rubbing her temple. Do you hear that? Like nails on chalkboard. My heart stopped. It was spreading through me. Or had it latched onto her? I bolted, muttering excuses, leaving her confused. That night she texted, "Felt weird after." "Dreams of tunnels, you okay?" I didn't reply. The entity communicated now, not in words but impulses. Urges to dig into walls, floors, earth. I found myself in Volunteer Park at 3 a.m., hands raw from clawing dirt, unearthing. Bones, no, just roots, but they felt alive, writhing. The symbols on my skin mapped a new labyrinth, mirroring Seattle's underground, forgotten tunnels from the 1800s, buried after the Great Fire. I researched frantically. Seattle's subterranean history, miles of abandoned basements and passages beneath Pioneer Square. Explorers whispered of hauntings, but nothing like this. One old article from the 1920s mentioned bone collectors, vagrants vanishing, remains found reassembled in bizarre sculptures. Coincidence? Or had the entity traveled before, hitching rides in intruders like me? Driven by the impulses, I descended. Seattle's underground tours are touristy, but I knew hidden entrances. A manhole near Yesler Way concealed in an alley. Gear minimal. Headlamp, the bear spray useless but comforting, and a recorder for proof. The drop was short, landing in dank brick tunnels, air musty with mold and history. Graffiti from bootleggers, echoes of the city's sinful past. The scratching guided me, a siren's call deeper in. Tunnels narrowed, intersecting natural caves, lava tubes from ancient volcanoes. Bones appeared, animal at first, then human. Skulls with bullet holes from old gang wars. The entity stirred within, excitement bubbling like acid in my veins. In a cavernous room, water dripping from stalactites, I found it. A nest, similar to Paris but smaller, bones from local dead woven with fresh additions. Whisker's collar tangled in the mass. It pulsed, and from it emerged a form, smaller than the guardian but kin. My infection birthed, a mini-entity with my eyes staring back, slitted and hateful. It lunged, claws grazing my face. I sprayed, the chemical clouding the air, but it adapted, melting into shadows. Pursuit reversed. I chased it now, through twisting passages, light failing as batteries drained unnaturally. It led me to a collapse, bricks tumbling, trapping me in darkness. Hours, days, time lost. I clawed out, emerging in an abandoned basement, sirens wailing above. Hospital again, dehydration, fractures, babbling about monsters. They sedated me, but in dreams the entity whispered, "We grow, intruders everywhere." Discharged, I returned home to find Sarah waiting, worried from my silence. "Alex, what's happening?" She touched my arm and I saw it. A faint symbol etching her skin, transferred like a virus. It wasn't contained. It hated intruders, and now the world was its catacomb. Seattle was just the start. The heart in Paris pulsed stronger, calling its children home, but I wouldn't go alone. The urges shifted: collect, build, hate. God help me, it's in us all now. I didn't sleep the night after I saw the symbol bloom on Sarah's wrist. I sat in the dark with the blinds closed and the television on mute, letting 1,000 strangers' faces flicker in the reflection while the scratching worked behind my eardrums like a key in a rusty lock. It wanted me underground. It wanted everyone underground. But if it could ride me into Seattle's forgotten veins, maybe it could ride me back the other way too. Parasites don't choose, they colonize. I told myself that like a prayer, because the other truth, that I'd already opened a door and lost the handle, would have paralyzed me. I made rules. No touching anyone. No staying in one place long enough for the walls to start listening. Speak only in rooms with open windows. Never sleep in a bed more than once. The rules failed immediately. The building's old pipes whispered, and the symbols itched when I stepped across thresholds as if doorways were mouths. I left anyway, moving light. Backpack, meds, flashlight, flares, recorder, that useless bear spray, and a brick of salt sealed in a zip bag like contraband. On my desk, I left a note for no one. If I don't come back, don't follow. I thought about Whisker's collar woven into the Seattle nest and almost turned around. Dead things pull you backward. The living pull you forward. I tried to decide which one I was. The mirror made the choice for me. Pupils tightening in the bathroom light. A flash of reflective animal sheen before the bland brown reasserted itself. The human face is such a hopeful lie. News feeds began twitching with patterns I recognized from Paris. Vandalized crypts in Lisbon, a collapse in Naples where the catacombs run ragged, a fire in a London tube maintenance shaft that left bone-white drips down brick like wax tears. Most people called it urban decay. The few who knew whispered in corners where the algorithms didn't listen. A message from Catacomb Crawler 87 pinged my burner. Not just you. They're blooming in old places. They, as if there were more than one heart. Maybe there were. Maybe some cities were only sleeping. The impulse to dig came in waves. It wasn't just hands and nails. I wanted to bite plaster, chew drywall, press my teeth into soil. When it crested, I walked. I traced alleys that dipped below street level, gratings with wet breath, doorways bricked a century ago and still smelling faintly like bread and tobacco when the wind changed. The urge eased when I stood above drains. It got worse near hospitals, bones underneath everything. Hospitals teach you to reorder them, to fail at it politely. On the fourth night after the coffee shop, I dreamt in second person, like I was watching myself from the entity's eyes. You go home, you lock the door, you lay your tools out. You strip the skin from your arm slowly, because the pattern underneath is what matters. You say thank you out loud to the door for letting you through, to the lock for keeping others out, to the walls for keeping you in. When I woke, the door was open, tools on the floor where I didn't remember putting them. The recorder on the table was on, hissing. When I rewound, it was just scratching at first, then a voice overlaid like mildew on wet paint. Wrong path. Then tell me the right one, I said to an empty room. He did, in a way. The map in Julian's wallet wasn't just a path through Paris. When I traced the spiral with claws over a satellite view of the city, the arms pointed like compasses to 4 other places: Naples, Prague, Lisbon, and Seattle. The pattern wasn't decoration. It was infrastructure, a nervous system. Something old had mapped itself on top of human mistakes, and now the old thing was awake enough to read the overlay from inside me. I booked a ticket for Paris. There wasn't a choice. Seattle would fill with nests if I stayed, and Sarah would grow a symbol a day until the lines met around her throat. At the airport, I wore 2 jackets and gloves and kept my eyes down. TSA looked at me like a problem, then like paperwork. Everyone was polite, even the steward who flinched when our fingertips brushed as he handed me water. Dry skin, I said. He nodded because the human brain is wired to accept the smallest lie if it allows the world to stay familiar. On the plane, as we punched through gray and into the oblivion of sun above the clouds, I wrote, "If I died in the tunnels, someone might find this notebook in my backpack and understand that I didn't mean to carry a war across an ocean." I set rules for Paris. Return the wallet, find the heart, find Julian if he was still a shape with a name. If I couldn't kill the thing, maybe I could starve it, collapse the arteries, salt the chambers, break enough bones that it took centuries to knit itself again. The word centuries should have comforted me. It didn't. Time is just depth measured sideways. A woman across the aisle asked if I was okay. She had kind eyes and a child sleeping with a damp forehead against her arm. "Turbulence," I said. She offered me gum. I refused. There are moments where salvation looks like kindness. There are other moments where kindness is an aperture that lets something through. Charles de Gaulle was fluorescence and slick floors, and a line of exhausted people moving like a school of fish. I felt the pull beneath the city immediately, like standing on a dock and sensing the tide through your feet. Paris hummed a subterranean note I recognized in my bones, because I'd worn a piece of its choir inside me for months. The fever broke in the taxi, sweat cooling in the October wind that knifed through the cracked window while the driver smoked and cursed motorcycle couriers. 𝒕𝒉𝒆�𝒓, I said. He nodded. Of course he did, because all roads for ghosts lead there. I got a room in a hotel that pretended to be older than it was. The wallpaper had a print of ivy that made me think of veins. I slept for 20 minutes and woke with dirt under my nails. My phone pulsed on the bed. A withheld French number, then a voicemail with no words, just scratching, then a voice not quite Julian's, not quite not. Bring it back to where you took it, or we come upstairs. I put the wallet in my pocket. I put the salt and the flares in a canvas bag I didn't care if I lost. I put the bear spray in anyway, because denial is a small courage. At dusk, I walked to the park with the manhole. The trees were losing leaves and the iron cover had a drink ring from someone's beer. Human life insisted on scumming the threshold. I took that as a blessing or a dare. When I levered the lid, the cool air rose like a memory. I lowered myself with practiced hands and the ladder bit my palms in the same old places. The tunnel breathed me in. The scratching, at last, stopped. Inside the silence, a new sound. A drip that counted like a metronome, and beneath it a heartbeat so slow you'd call it the earth settling if you didn't already know its name. Alex. The voice came from down the artery, carried perfectly by stone. It wasn't coming toward me. It was drawing me forward. I went, because I always have. The artery recognized me the way a scar recognizes the blade that made it. My light carved a thin corridor through breath that had been exhaled centuries ago and never allowed to leave. The chalk marks we'd left months before had been licked clean. The walls glittered wetly, not with water but with a sheen like membrane. The catacombs had healed. I followed the old route by bone memory. The chapel of femur crosses, the low crawl where knuckles rasp stone, the cathedral cavern with the black pool that reflects light like gilt. The heartbeat didn't just throb anymore, it articulated. Thump, scrape, hush. It was language, and I already knew the grammar even if I didn't want the vocabulary. Something massed ahead, weight compressing air until my ears popped. The tunnel widened without warning into a gallery I didn't recognize, new since last time the living were here, which meant it had been carved by the dead. The floor was a mosaic of broken skull caps set like coins. In the center, a pillar of vertebrae spiraled upward, bound with rusted rebar, candles guttering in niches between ribs. At its base lay offerings, trinkets, photographs, metro tickets, a child's shoe and Julian's wallet, which left my pocket without being touched and slid across the stones like iron to a magnet. I tried to snatch it back. My fingers went numb. The pillar shuddered as if pleased. "Julian," I said, because names are anchors and I needed anything that bit. The air answered with footsteps soft as lint. He arrived in pieces, first the voice from a side passage, breathy and amused, then his shadow detaching from darkness as if reluctant to carry a body. He looked thinner, eyes milkier, but his smile was the same rueful half-curve that had made me trust him. His forearm still showed the skull tattoo, though it was stretched wrong, as if the skin had been repurposed on someone else's arm before being returned. "You came back," he said. "Good. We need you." My light trembled. "I brought what I took." He tilted his head, listening to something behind my words. "It took more than a wallet, Alex. It took your direction. You're a compass. You point." The pillar thrummed. The candles brightened and dimmed in sync with my pulse. I backed away and the flames guttered in disapproval. "I'm not here to feed it," I said. "I'm here to stop it." Julian laughed gently, the way a teacher laughs at a child who's asked to hold the moon. "You can't kill a city's reflex, but you can aim it. They used to do that in plagues, wall off a neighborhood, let it burn so the rest could breathe. Mercy measured in streets." His eyes slid to the vertebrae pillar. "It wants a living syntax. Bones remember nouns. They don't do verbs. That's why it collects us. We give it movement." "Is this what happened to you?" I asked. "Did you choose?" "I chose to not die for nothing." He gestured around. "I map, I warn. I steer it away from schools, hospitals, the night trains. It listens if you speak in the right tense." The scratching began again, but not from behind. It traced circles around the gallery, just outside the range of my light, like a dog deciding where to lie down. Small shapes gathered, guardians, their seams fresher, their eyes reflecting like dropped coins. They didn't attack. They watched with insect patience. The pillar crooned, vertebrae ticking against rebar as if counting. "Give me a line to the heart," I said, "or kill me now." Julian's smile drained. "It will have you either way, but if you insist on seeing, you'll need to pay a toll. Speak the word you've been avoiding." "I'm sorry," I said, though I meant it for Sarah, for Whiskers, for anonymous bones whose rearrangement had made my life an instrument. "I'm sorry. That's not the word." His lips barely moved. "Say mine," I swallowed. "Julian." The pillar sighed as if a belt had loosened after a large meal. A seam cracked open in the far wall, thin as a paper cut, and exhaled air so old it was sweet. Behind it, stairs corkscrewed down in a tighter spiral than any quarry had carved. I realized my mistake too late. The password wasn't for the door. It was consent to play my role. We descended, my light and his steady dark. On the third turn, the walls changed from limestone to something polished and black, flecked with white chips that arranged themselves into constellations if I stared too long. The heartbeat quieted. The hush remained. Our footsteps didn't echo. Sound was swallowed and skimmed like fat. "Where did this come from?" I whispered. "Before Paris," he said. "Before cities remembered their dead." We emerged into the heart. It was larger than a cathedral and shaped like one turned inside out. Arches bulged inward, columns pulsed like throat tissue. In the center stood the throne of fused skulls I'd glimpsed before, but now it was merely furniture beside the true presence. A hanging mass like a cocoon the size of a bus, suspended by cords of braided tendon. Through its translucent skin, things moved, limbs finding sockets, eyes rolling into holes, jaws testing bites. The cords anchored into the columns and beyond them into veins etched into the black walls like silver roots. It felt me arrive. The cords tightened, and the cocoon rotated until what passed for a face oriented toward me. It wasn't a face. It was an equation solved with bone and will. My scratches flared, heat rippling up my arms and across my chest as the symbols on my skin completed themselves. I understood then. I wasn't infected, I was formatted. The voice in my head had always been a chorus, but now it was a city. Bells, wheels, shouted orders in languages that forgot their verbs. Under it all, the hiss I'd heard for months, translated into words that belonged to stone. Intruder. "Hate, aim. You brought it upstairs," Julian said softly. "Now bring it back down." "How?" "By giving it what it can't build, a present tense." I could refuse. I could run and let it hunt through streets and tunnels until it found another syntax speaker, someone less tired, more hopeful. But cities don't make heroes. They make functions. I stepped forward with the salt in my left hand and the wallet in my right and offered both. The cocoon shivered. The cords relaxed. The guardians gathered at the edges of the room, heads bowed as if in prayer. A slit opened in the cocoon, not horizontally like a mouth, but vertically like a wound. It expected me to climb in. "Tell me there's a way out," I said. Julian's smile returned, small, indelible. "There's always a way out. It's just usually down." I climbed. Inside the cocoon, heat and cold took turns the way interrogators do, asking the same question until the answer breaks. I sank to my chest in gel that tasted like pennies and old teeth. Bones bumped me gently, as if curious. Hands too many, found my ribs and counted. The symbols on my skin peeled free like decals and slid into the gel, then back onto me, repositioned so they made sense in a language that existed only at depths without air. Breathe, I thought, and the cocoon translated it into a contraction that expressed, continue. I did. The chords thrummed and the room replied across stone and time. I felt Paris bristle, then settle, streets relaxing like shoulders after a held breath. It wasn't relief. It was acceptance of instruction. Don't lose your nouns, Julian's voice said from outside or inside. It will try to speak you in verbs until you are only motion. What am I supposed to do? Partition, direct, choose. The gel climbed my throat. For a moment I was every blocked doorway, every sealed staircase, every plague wall, every sandbag on a riverbank that kept a neighborhood from drowning at the cost of a different neighborhood drowning more. I saw the other nodes in the spiral, Naples, Prague, Lisbon, Seattle, lit like coals. I could open them, I could close them. The power was obscene and tasted like copper pennies on my tongue. I tested it. I thought of the hospital nearest 𝒕𝒉𝒆𝒂𝒓 and spoke in the grammar the cocoon had poured into me. Not here. The mass obeyed. I felt the guardians reroute away from maternity wards, from the night shift smoke breaks, from the low hum of incubators. The scratching drifted toward the industrial outskirts, toward tunnels no one had the paperwork to enter. It hated intruders. I could tell it who those were. For the first time since Paris took me inside it, I let myself feel something like hope, thin as a child's bracelet and twice as fragile. We could aim the hate at tunnels where no one would bleed who hadn't chosen the depth. We could starve the nests above ground. We could. The cocoon recoiled in sudden fury, and pain flashed white. It had sensed my thought reach farther than Paris. Seattle answered like a sibling woken. The node there had learned to grow without permission, fed by the infection I'd brought home. It was building a new syntax from pieces of me I'd left behind in alleys and drains. It wanted reunion. It wanted me to open all doors at once. No, I said in a voice that shook the gel. The chords snapped taut, yanking. A counter voice pressed into my skull with a crowd's weight. Open. I held. In the black room, the guardians hissed, 1,000 files on bone. Julian shouted, drowned. The cocoon bore down with the gravity of 6 million orderly stacks and all the ones that weren't. I understood then why they needed a living mind. They needed someone to push back against instinct. Hate isn't a strategy, it's an accelerant. A memory saved me, not a noble one. Whiskers blinking at me from the sink. Silly, domestic, absolute. I grabbed that softness like a rope and spoke again, louder in the grammar that was also breathing. Open 1. Close 3. Hold. The chords slackened a fraction. The gel cooled. Around us, the heart chamber stopped shivering. I chose a vent tunnel under a depot miles from neighborhoods, one whose only visitors wore headlamps and lies. I opened it like a throat. The hate flowed there. It wasn't gone. It was focused. The guardians tilted as if scenting a trail and departed in a quiet procession. The scratching thinned to a ribbon and left. Good, Julian said, close enough that I felt his words against the cocoon's skin. Now keep doing that until morning. Morning in the catacombs isn't light. It's a pattern of footfalls passing overhead in a rhythm that belongs to bakeries and buses. I held all night. When my arms cramped, the gel carried the ache away. When my focus faltered, the chords tightened until I remembered people have names. I recited them. Sarah, Whiskers, Julian, the steward with the flinch, the woman on the plane with gum and kindness sharp as a key. Names keep nouns from eroding. At last the cocoon loosened. The slit unsealed and let me fall forward onto the stone like something unearthed. Julian was waiting with a towel that had no right to be warm. I was cold to my marrow but lighter, as if some significant percentage of me had been converted into instruction and spent. What did it cost? I asked. He didn't answer. He helped me stand. The guardians ringed the heart, quiet as pews after a sermon. The vertebrae pillar far above hummed faintly, as if recording new scripture. "Can I leave?" I asked. The word leave echoed deeper than I intended. The walls bent, listening toward it and then away, disappointed. "For now," he said. "It doesn't lock the door behind you when you walk in. It just moves the door so you're grateful when you find it again." We climbed. At the seam that had been a paper cut, stone had already knitted. It parted reluctantly. The gallery of skull caps seemed almost festive after the heart. My wallet lay where I'd surrendered it. I didn't touch it. "Seattle," I asked. "If I can hold here, can I hold there?" "You'll have to," he said. "No one else speaks your dialect." I hated him briefly for the truth. "What am I now?" "A guard," he said. "Not the guardian." "Don't confuse the article. It matters." We reached the ladder. Cold air moved up from the artery like a long apology. I climbed, and the symbols on my arms warmed through my sleeves, not flaring but alert. The park smelled like beer and leaves and the specific way Paris does rain. A cyclist rattled over the manhole cover without knowing he'd rung a bell. "Won't it just follow me up again?" I asked. "It already has," Julian said from below. "But now when it scratches, it's asking for orders. And if I stop answering," he didn't smile, "it will answer itself." I closed the cover. The city resumed around me. I walked to the hotel in a body that had the same height and weight but carried a second spine of instructions. My phone lit with messages I wasn't ready to read. One from an American number: "Sarah, dreams again, tunnels. You okay?" I typed and deleted 3 replies before sending. "Working. Keep windows open. Salt the sills. Don't meet me inside." I slept for an hour and woke to a quiet I knew I'd purchased with something I couldn't afford again. Downstairs, the concierge asked if I'd enjoyed the sights. "Always," I said, and meant it differently than he'd intended. I flew back the next day with salt in my shoes and tiredness in my teeth. Over Greenland, the symbols on my arms cooled to a tolerable hum. Over Canada, the hum sharpened toward a particular pitch that spelled a street name I recognized. Seattle stirred. At home, the city was waiting, but it had paused where I'd asked it to. The nest beneath Pioneer Square had grown a mouth and was thirsty for verbs. I stood above it under the grating at dusk, the tide of traffic clattering like prayer beads, and spoke down in the tense the heart had taught me. "Not here." The scratching shifted. It moved toward a warehouse slated for demolition. No one slept there. No one kept their photographs there. No one kept a cat. I am not a hero. I am a hinge. I keep things from opening that would rather be open, and I open others that deserve the teeth. When I fail, the hate will do what hate does. When I sleep, the city will whisper to itself and practice saying my name in stone until I wake. Sometimes late, I hear another voice in the pipes. It says Alex the way Julian did, with both the warning and the welcome braided tight. I answer with nouns. I say streets. I say faces. I say mine, yours, ours. It hates that. It listens anyway.